Welcome, everyone, to the Ad.podcast. Today I have a guest from the Chicago area, Hemi Trickey. And Hemi is an architect, a software architect. She's been architecting and delivering highly critical and complex software and technology solutions for almost 3 decades. And interestingly, she's currently the head of global enterprise architecture for the team there at McDonald's. So whenever you see a Big Mac commercial or drop in for an Egg McMuffin or a milkshake or something, you can think of Hemi being behind that. So can you tell us a little bit, welcome, by the way, welcome. And can you tell us a bit more about your background, Hemi?
Yeah, sure. So I started my career out of college in the early 90s, and after briefly worked at a software company, I spent most of the next 15 years or so in a telecom provider industry, which is where Bell Labs, Lucent Technologies were essentially the telecom industry. And then that's where I learned a lot of the design patterns, the C and the C++ and all the, and watched the applications kind of, the technology grew from, where the web was really proliferated, and then we got into the mobile world and so on. And then what was interesting was I kind of then went into a very, very different industry, which is it's largely a consulting firm, but focused on digital marketing. So kind of went from the deep, the technology world that which is more or less invisible to the consumers, to very much consumer-facing kind of technology, and that was where. Not just the experience part of it, the brands part of the technology, but that was also when, a lot of the large companies and technology world started to get into the digital transformation. That's when the cloud started to form. And then we also got into a lot of the product engineering kind of practice. And then about 5 years ago, I made another pivot, which is kind of where I am at currently as the head of enterprise architecture. So this is actually where you could say that I used a lot of the architecture patterns and sort of implicitly thinking about architecture and a solution delivery. But now I'm almost like full time thinking about architecture all the time. So nice. It's been interesting.
Yeah, very nice. And interestingly, too, that you actually developed a SaaS in your telecom days, right? But it wasn't really the meaning software as a service. And you did that well before it really had a tag like that, like SaaS, right? Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, it was, I think even before SaaS, the SaaS name became kind of a household name. Everybody adopted. I think before that, there was the term of ASP, right? Application Service Providers. And it was, we developed essentially a platform and solutions very much in that model before these terminologies actually get solidified in the industry. What was happening was where in the telecom world, there was a lot of, you can see network elements and, huge complex systems that is being deployed for, AT&T's and Verizon and Sprint and all these providers. And it's large distributed systems. And there needs to be a lot more the management software layer, whether it's to manage capacity, to provision, to look at the performance and so on. And so this is more or less a way to kind of have all of that being pulled together in a loosely coupled way to provide different kind of application functionalities, but being hosted in just use it as software as a service. So a lot of interesting, we started to do kind of web-based APIs rather than SOAP. That was the popular terms back then. And having the notion of just software being hosted and applications, whether it's rich client or thin client, being just hosted through the platform.
Yeah, I recall that during the dot-com boom, late 90s and early 2000, maybe till 2001 or two or something, there were a lot of those kinds of SaaS or applications, I guess, or platforms being developed, and many of those failed. I can't think of one that is still in existence. Probably are some, but so I do recall what you're talking about there, and I did work on a few of those myself, but people were just chasing the new internet at the time, and even though it wasn't totally new by late 90s, it was still relatively many were scrambling just to get some kind of application online. And
and I think at the time also there was the portal concept was very popular, right? There was a lot about how do you go onto the internet, how do you have that presence. The SOA type of concept was still kind of that's the other part, right? Which is where we kind of brought it and say, hey, you've got Windows applications, or you've got web-based applications that is of use, right? How do we then do the next step to bring it in and provide it to the customers?
Yeah, neat. So then you've seen this very broad range of different kinds of businesses working B2B, B2C, I guess, those kinds of applications and services that you're working with. How do you see the architecture changing across those? If you look back, what are the differences or the similarities too?
Yeah. So what was really one of the biggest things that contrasting from an architecture lens point of view that jumped out to me when I transitioned from telecom to, marketing. Obviously, it's a more general kind of practice, but like more, let's say, facing, retail industry or entertainment industry and whatnot. What was very interesting was in the telecom world, even back then, right? You're dealing with large scale distributed systems. So you are already thinking about a lot of, event driven architecture and so on. And then what's more important was that observability and manageability and that is, and reliability, right? That's like a first class consideration. You don't ship anything until you have defined these instrumentation, the metrics, and then how do you see how things are running, right? Just for the asserts and so on. And by nature, you had to do this. Those are obviously, much relaxed in the retail world, for example. But on the other hand, once you started to see the digital transformation, just the nature of forcing all the microservices, right? And then this whole cloud transformation, just the nature of moving on to the cloud, it kind of forces everybody to break that into a lot more pieces, right? And then forces that more of that event-driven architecture. And it's just like, you have no option to kind of start just by nature adopting cloud. And so then comes with that is, okay, so then we have to know something about our systems. You have to bring in observability more, right? You have to figure these things out. But at the end of the day, I think this is an interesting kind of a paradigm shift, I would say, right? Which I think this is the good thing that, if you have something of the distributed, these kind of background, and then versus if you're just kind of new to the cloud or, this software pattern, it seems new, but this is where I would say that there's some very good established patterns and thinking that we can bring forward from these different industries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, please.
No.
Oh,
yeah.
well, I was just going to say that you kind of brought back some memories too of discussions I had in, say, way back to 1999, 2000 in there. And this was in the Denver Tech Center area. There's I think Galileo is still around. They're like they were somehow travel booking engine or something like that. And then there was a related company or maybe a subsidiary or maybe part of them. It was called Magellan. Maybe Galileo acquired Magellan. Anyway, point is, we were having conversations back then about helping that company, and they were using BEA WebLogic as an application server. Of course, when you do that, you have to use Oracle as your database. And I remember very vividly this discussion with probably chief architect and he was talking about the complexity of and the scale of dealing with 100 transactions per second. And wow, that today, I don't know what your environment is like, but you could easily, or in telecom, right, be dealing with millions of transactions per second. And so there's that aspect too, the sort of quality attributes that have to be supported.
Yep. Yeah, totally. And then if you think about what's happening, what's proliferating right now is just there's so much unlock in every aspect of just innovation, right? There's so much that's happening now in the industry, every dimension that you look at. The other interesting piece, if you think about what's happening and what's changing over time, is just that pure amount of innovation that's happening, and so then the question is, how do you keep up with that, right? This is where, if I reflect back, there's a lot more sort of commoditization or competition that forces the commoditization aspect. And then on the adoption side, right, the frequency of asking the question build versus buy is a lot more, right? Like, because it's available or because there's something that's out there that's somebody's innovating that you want to be able to bring in. So what's the process? Is it that you want to bring it in a little bit faster? And then figure out, how you can build better, or do you build, but then do you compete with what's already out there? So, which is where, it leads to a lot more conversations about, composability and headless versus headful, right? This is, and so how, adopting some more of these patterns, and how does this help us to kind of keep up with the pace? So.
Yeah. And then, of course, as you bring up, this is a real challenge to keep up with this, I don't know, wave or maybe tsunami after tsunami kind of thing, right? Where the technology just keeps rolling in. And then you still have to innovate. And I think, do I recall correctly that McDonald's won some kind of technology, like innovation award from, I don't even want to say, because I don't want to, wrongly attribute the source of this, but I seem to recall that McDonald's was ranked quite high on the innovation scale. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think it's one of our, we're ranked on one of the most innovative companies somewhere. But in general, I would say that if you, people think historically, McDonald's is an established brand, right? But I think it's pretty apparent these days, more and more, that McDonald's is becoming more of a technology player. And in every front, right? Like what we're doing with AI, what we're doing with even just like how we're delivering our solutions at the scale. at our scale. And it's interesting in the sense that it's a very different, like by scale, it introduces very, very different architecture problems, very, very different challenges across, if you start to think about the different geography, different, the kinds of volume and nuances that you need to consider. And so I think the innovation aspects, and then like every company, like every large enterprise, there's always aspects of there's legacy that you still need to transform. And so then the question is, how do you keep up? How do you do both? How do you transform the enterprise and be on the fast innovation front?
Okay, so from McDonald's being an award-winning franchise-based restaurant chain, you still have all of this innovation to do. How do you make decisions on innovation that's happening so quickly in the industry while still balancing the need to move fast and innovate internally, and also dealing with transforming and addressing legacy challenges in a large enterprise scale environment?
Yeah, sure. There are a few aspects to it. We have, generally have a few strategies we use when it comes to adopting innovations from the industry. Obviously, this is where composability becomes really, really important to us, both from our readiness to integrate and bring in, incorporate the innovation, but also in terms of our lens looking at, something that someone might bring to us. And then the other thing is, which I'll talk about a little bit more, but the other aspect is partnerships. How do we partner and co-evolve? How do we learn from the right kind of partners in terms of adopting and bringing in new thinking? So when we do have actually a lot of interesting learnings along the way when it comes to looking at the innovations from the industry, some of those things are if there are, you have to use a very critical lens, and sometimes the architectural lens comes in very helpful. It comes back to, there's always a set of trade-offs. And when somebody comes to us and says, we can offer everything that you ever want to do, that's probably too good to be true. And there's trade-offs somewhere. And so a interesting evaluation would be, flexibility versus performance trade-offs or scalability trade-offs. And the other thing that's really interesting is if you can do a lot, anything you want, right? If a product that can come out of the box and be able to tailor to McDonald's or Target or a financial industry or whatnot, it means that you have to engineer on top of it. It means that it builds so much flexibility. How you engineer on top is becomes its own job, right? And I think people are familiar with traditional large ERP is in that sense. And that implementation, I think this is where it gets really interesting, is how much, it kind of shifts the job of architecting a solution, home built solution, to really how well you can engineer. How should that process be? How should that engineered solution be? And then still, does it work for you, right? So these are some interesting lenses. And then another good example is if you also have to kind of look past, what would be sort of the de facto established players versus who may be the really new ones, niche players, because a lot of times what comes through may be same. It's hard to tell apart. Everybody will be saying, hey, we got this new cool AI, functionality. Everybody's talking the same way, right? But how do you look past and really say, okay, this is the truly one that has the potential with us versus this is just generic, everybody speak. And what we found that's interesting was, we start to get into really trying to understand maybe a little bit of under the hood conversations. Truly, what does the system do? And this gets into, if I were to build a system that offers these capabilities, how would I be designing it? How would I be solution this? And the kind of thinking that provides a lot of visibility into would it bring us the value that someone's promising us to do. So that's very interesting learning, because usually, when you get into sort of the vendor solution evaluation, you don't get under the hood, but that's the insights that we kind of learned to rely on a lot to kind of predict, hey, does it really bring the value that we're looking to bring in?
Good. Yeah, so I've actually been having this conversation a lot. If you think about Wardley mapping, a Wardley map where you have these kind of four regions or swim lanes or value stream areas. So you've got Genesis, custom, product, and I always want to say utility, but it's utility would fall under oh my goodness, hang on just a second. Commodity. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes.
Commodity. Yeah. So you would think of utilities as falling under commodity kind of thing. Probably operating systems and many kinds of databases fall into commodity at this point. But okay, let's go back to Genesis now. So should we actually start over again? Like kind of what you were saying, right? And what I've been emphasizing most recently is, can you actually buy something so it's a product which is going to reduce a lot of risk, but still have a genesis on top of that, right? Where you are innovating on top of the sort of product, or I would say not commodity at that point probably, but it is at least a product. And so you don't have to take on all that risk of sort of competing with something that you can purchase. And yet it's very likely not going to be everything that you need for true innovation, right? Well, it simply isn't, because anybody could buy it, right? So is that sort of what you're driving at there?
Yeah, and which is where I think for McDonald's scale, a lot of time what we would get into is, like you said, you're probably, it may not just readily do everything that you're looking to do, but this is where the co-evolution or partnership kind of lens is actually very important to us, because once we start to look at this, it's not just at present what it offers, it is where it might go and what's the innovation pattern it gets from there. And then McDonald's would always have our nuances and our, kind of particular, just by sheer size, right? And so how do we, so that's the lens that we're saying, okay, is this a path that we could be on together, and or not, like that potential. So.
Good. So, okay. So from there, you must be interviewing, listening to a lot of platform vendors, other kinds of vendors, their pitches, and you listen to them, and you're facing all these challenges that we just discussed. What are some of the key lessons that you've learned from that?
So I mentioned some of them earlier. I would say that there are, not every vendor is coming in for McDonald's as a, innovation or a new thing for us, right? It could just be, hey, a need. We identified a gap and we're trying to bring a solution. But to that point, the interesting part again is that once we start to actually even apply the same lens, like in our engineering, in our product delivery, we all want to do the best engineering practices, the CI/CD, how we do code management, how do we do testing, what's the release cadence, and all of that stuff, right? But it's very interesting because if you look at when for McDonald's, in my role, we look at everything from customer facing solutions to back office solutions, and when you look at that, literally, it's kind of like a mini world, right? Everything, every industry, every aspect of running the business. And some of them are, some space is a slightly, less is more stable, right? Or some space is more fast changing. So what you see is it's the same thing happening across the whole spectrum. Is there are established vendors going through their own transformation, and then there's the up and coming because of what the cloud and everything unlocked for the level setting effect, right? There's these new startups and newer, smaller players, but it's very, very, the speed they're at, they go very fast. The feature functionality is very quick for them to catch up on. But they may not have, they only have 80% of all the feature functionalities, right? But is it good enough? Maybe it's good enough because of their velocity is so high. And whereas the incumbent, right, they move a lot slower, and then they may be less coherent, to be honest, like feature functioning. Sometimes they go out and buy somebody else in order to offer a gap that they couldn't have, right? And so in that sense, what we're looking at is probably the potential, the velocity, and just by understanding a little more about their engineering ability to kind of help us predict whether, it's going to be a more sustainable player with McDonald's or not. And so applying that lens, kind of flipping that, right? Because we usually talk about this for ourselves, for our own engineering orgs, but flipping that, even just as we're looking at evaluating, hey, if we're going to partner or if we're going to use somebody's product, would they have the same kind of speed for us? And that has given us a lot of interesting, and if we use that insight, and the result of that is we were actually, once it was very interesting. Once I was in the conversation with in a particular very, very niche area, and there were so many pain points of the incumbent product, right? And honestly, our user community is just scratching their heads and just so painful. And they were like, could you please help us do an architecture evaluation? And I out of a lot of different things, I kind of probed a little bit about, hey, how do you do release management, code management? And they've got these long running branches, very long. And then out of that, I came out and I said, you know what? I bet it would take them months just to merge the branches. I bet it takes them a long time to do the releases, right? And they were like, yes, that's exactly the problem. Even if they have a P1 problem, they can never get the fix even on time, right? And so that was the kind of interesting learnings.
Right. And you you kind of triggered a thought that I had. How does it go? So they may take 80% of the work off your plate, which is good. But then there's the kind of saying that the first 80% is easy, but the second 80% is hard. So the 20% is actually like 80%, right? Or it's 100% of what you need to do, in the sense that the actual innovation is the hard part. And it's good to have those areas of kind of, generic or supporting subdomains pushed out of the way for you. That's all good. But then the innovation itself is a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if you look at this from a ecosystem lens, because for me, it's about the entire ecosystem, and there would be spaces that has a lot more innovation versus the space that would be more stable in the sense. But there are probably different kind of approaches or strategy that we would deal with in different space. One thing is, especially also in the innovation, where it's a hotbed for innovation, right? We do want to look out for the tendency for just chasing the shiny new objects. And then, of course, on the reverse end, if you do have, a lot of legacy systems, sometimes you could just say, hey, you know what, we could just leapfrog, right? Or or just by the pure, architecture strategy, right? Just abstract it out, and just how do we more coherently move the entire ecosystem forward? So,
can you talk about some of the shiny new objects that you've seen pop up that, at least in your world, should be avoided? I don't know if you actually want to say that. It might not be a favorable thing for you to say, but if you can, what are some of those things?
And I'm probably not very specific, but I would say that this is more likely my general exposure in, for example, marketing domain as a whole. And then I can say this just from an industry domain standpoint, right? If you look at, there's actually published, every annual, yearly kind of a MarTech landscape view, right? Like, even if you just look at the industry,
I just lost you. You said, I think you just had said something about Can you back up to the marketing? Just in general, you said in general, the marketing area, you just went away for 15 seconds or something.
Okay. If you look at the marketing space in general, just the marketing technologies, just look at this as an industry. There's actually a published report annually on the MarTech landscape, and it is thousands, 10,000 kind of growth, right? Crazy. These are just commercial systems that's out there, that's available. And so you can judging by that in terms of, hey, how many new things that just pops up every year, or reconfigures, the whole landscape, right? So in general, and I talk about this because when I talk to other colleagues in the other companies and so on, it's the same kind of observation, is that there's so much pressure on the new ways of engaging users, and generally in the marketing and CRM space, that it almost always feels like it's always too slow to build. It's always, I could just buy something, right? Incorporate something, and I'll have it because this is what the vendor says that you can do now, XYZ, right, if you get my product, right?
Except that, is it really true always,
Exactly.
Yeah.
First off, is it always true? Second off, I think this is exactly where I think in the MarTech space, it's very easy to get into the situation that you have a lot of different tools. They don't all work together, and then they all do kind of something similar, and you have to go to different systems to do something, right? And so this is where I'm saying that, it's very easy to kind of be pitched and be, thinking about this. It's very nice. This is where it's so important then to have this kind of architectural lens and saying, actually, we have, you know, 5 systems already that does, each system is doing for what purpose, right? For what responsibility. And if there was, what is the objective? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And then where does it fit? Like, which domain, right? And what area does it belong? So,
yeah, interesting. All the options that you were just talking about, that's overwhelming, right? I mean, just thinking about what choice do you make out of, what did you say, 10,000 or something? And
oh yeah,
and
yep.
it seems like it would even be difficult to be like a development partner of one of those. One, that's the question, is which one? How do you become a development partner for one of those marketing solutions, let's say, and choose which one are we going to be an expert in, or which are the top 2 or 3, maybe 3 that we could work on. That sounds, pretty crazy.
I think this is where we are, pushing very hard on and really making the right kind of domain mapping, and down to, we talk about capability domains and so on, right? Like, have that very clear articulation and what kind of capability and what's the domain boundaries for each capability. And it may get down to a little bit lower level breakdowns, because we need to be able to reason through, is it one system, 2 systems, and if we need to add another one, right? And so how do you draw that boundary, and how do you define the interaction patterns? And then every month or whatnot, right? You're talking about something new that's coming in the data space, or in, the activation space, and so on.
Yeah. I'm thinking that someone that I interviewed a long time, a few years ago now, or 3 years ago now, who I think you may have met recently, is Xian Yao at the Explore DDD conference. And I think she must have also dealt with a lot of the same challenges. And I don't know if you got to hear her kind of experience report. It was a conference talk, but her experience report was both, I thought it was very enlightening, but she was also kind of ranting about some of the things that she experienced that were very, negative experiences that she had in the industry, where there was just a huge disconnect in communication, and they thought they were building one thing, and they literally got to a point and it just wasn't even what the company wanted. And yeah.
I heard that. That goes back to, again, the language, right? Which in large company, it's so important. And it's even, I would say that sometimes it's not sufficient to, even if, write down and sit down and do, a contract statement of work or whatever with an agency, right? Because even to that aspect, we may still be talking past each other. There is so much context. And so, to that point, again, there is an element of complexity and scale, but then, very clear kind of, honestly, at this point, I feel like, my job is to, continuous, from ambiguity to clarity. It's a continuous journey, just because there is there's so much there. So.
Yeah, and I think what's great about your experience, and like I mentioned, Cian's experience, is that there is the side of, okay, I want to rant about this, but it's also important that you are learning lessons from it, right? Like, her talk wasn't just a matter of ranting. She also made it clear, now I can understand why these things are so important when I experienced this. And I think she said something like, my team and I decided we will never allow this to happen again, right? They know how to now work around it. And that's the important thing. And when you have those kind of, in the trenches battle scars, I guess, you can either choose to just be bitter about it and walk away, or you can learn from it. And like she said, never let it happen again. So I'm glad you're sharing your lessons with us.
Yeah. And again, I would go back to, where I feel like we're, if I think about this as complex adaptive systems, or, just kind of natural way of the world, right? And it is not about one solution, one design, one delivery, especially if you just step back and all of a sudden you look at this large enterprise and many dozens of systems, right? And all these different factors. I know a lot of people talk about social technical, but I mean, honestly, there is all these different dimensions happening that, that's the richness of it. So.
Right. Okay, so here's another lesson I think we can learn from you. In all this modernization and transformation work that you've been busy with, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see people, individuals, teams, organizations make in those efforts?
The biggest learning from my side is, it's interesting. There's just how much lack of awareness or appreciation. Actually, for me, even myself, it's a learning journey. So I have to admit that, right? It used to be, I feel I can design, I feel I can architect, and all of that, right? But I think I've come to really, really appreciate the importance of business processes or operational context. And I would probably go even further than what I typically hear DDD talk about, right? In terms of founded context, in terms of event storming and all of that. I think what I see a lot is, people, the how it works today, it's been so ingrained in people's every day. And even if you bring in people who operate on something every day, even if you bring in, let's say business people, the technical people, engineers and whatnot, right? It's been so ingrained. The language that people use is, I go into this system and I do this, then I do to do that, right? And we have forgotten, it's very easy to forget that actually what is the intent, the original intent? What do we need to get? What's the job to be done originally? And it became these, 12 different steps of things, whether it's systems or manual or whatever. And that's how people describe it usually. And then when we do modernization, that's why I think there's a difference between, like, when you use the words modernization or transformation or whatever, right? When you think about this, I think if you're not careful, people are still using the same language. Well, I got to do this because this is how it's done. People treat this like Bibles, right? And so I think it's important to interrogate. Actually, I would even add on to this. This is not just legacy systems or operations issue. Even as you introduce a new thing, let's say innovation, right? Because of AI, because of what AI can do now, we can automate certain things. what's the tendency today is still people's mind. We're automating a piece along the existing process flow that people have been doing every day for the last 10 years or whatever, right? In reality, if you just forgot about this, right, it's probably a much simpler way to think about this if we just start it from and say, what is really that we try to get to? So that is, and related to that though, is that actually itself is change management. It is, technology is really the easiest part. And so
herding cats, right? So,
yeah.
Well, you've learned a lot. Maybe one final general question. So as a chief architect in a large enterprise, what are the sort of most important things that you've learned that you would advise others to be careful of, and also things that they should do?
Yeah, I think, so I would say, I kind of said the first thing, which is, tech changes, I believe is the easiest part of the change. It's even with, I'm just re-platforming something, actually it's change management, it's process change and so on, right? But I would add to it is that context is so important too. And so comes with that, everybody has a context. Everybody has whatever, they do, right? So I think it's very, very important for me, as an architect, to have really good listening skills, to pick out the context, even if there was just emotions that you're detecting, to pick it out, right? And then you can actually be, you can actually bring that broader, like all the aspects together for everybody else to see, because everybody has just one piece of something. And it's our job to kind of, paint that overall and bring in these different aspects together. So that's, obviously to do that, you got to have empathy, being compassionate, right? And then also be able to kind of spot, opportunities and so on.
Nice, good advice. So I'm hoping, I don't know when I guess it would be 2025 Explore DDD conference would be, but maybe we'll get to hear a talk from you when that happens.
Okay. I'll think about
I'm not
that.
an organizer. Yeah. I'm only suggesting that it'd be very interesting to hear your experience and both domain-driven design, but any other, like you said, change management within kind of a domain-driven area where you have legacy users, legacy experts who sort of maybe don't want to change their mind about things, right? Like they think it's got to work this way forever, and they're not really open to innovation. And how do you manage that kind of change in terms of the people aspects of it, not just putting things in a whatever it would be, I hate to even say the product name Jira, but I will. But that's where a lot of this stuff ends up. But that's not what we're talking about here, right? We're not talking about the tool that you store information about the changes you would like to make or that you intend to make, but literally, how do you make the change? How do you surface the need for the change and put those into a value stream, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so, well, very good. Let's kind of wrap things up here. And I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're very busy, and thank you again for meeting with us. And anything else that you just wanted to add in closing comments? No need to, but maybe just one other thing you thought of.
No, thank you for having this conversation. Enjoyed it. I hope we can continue to dialogue.
Yeah, we'll do that. Thank you so much.